Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Die Hard, starring Bruce Willis, Alan Rickman, Bonnie Bedelia, Reginald VelJohnson, and Paul Gleason, directed by John McTiernan. Now, before I get into this, welcome to the Die Hard retrospective series. I've never done this series before. And is this movie considered a Christmas movie? I will talk about it in my review, but I first want to say I apologize for how late this has been recorded because to tell you the truth, I was on vacation for a week and I got sick with a cold and a nonstop coughing. I'm still recovering, but I'll be better. But let's see how much of a Christmas movie this is. Let's get into it. Flying from New York to Los Angeles, a New York cop named John McClane, played by Bruce Willis, arrives in LA for Christmas time to visit his family there for the holidays, and he gets a limousine ride from Argyle while his wife Holly Gennaro McClane, played by Bonnie Bedelia, works at the Nakatomi Building, which is a famous building after this movie in the 30th floor, as John happens to arrive at the Nakatomi Building and checks into Holly's office as he feels divorced by his wife. And I like John as the protagonist, as I felt bad for him as the character. And the shots are magnificent in the Nakatomi Building. John meets Holly's boss, Takagi, as well as Ellis, and he reunites with Holly after 6 months while he washes up and has an argument with Holly until her assistant asks her to make a speech. Meanwhile, some criminals, led by German radical Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman, enter the Nakatomi Building and take it over and their office, including their office, as well as shooting up the front desk guy and a security guard, while John makes a run for it in a different floor as he makes a call to Argyle, and suddenly the phone lines are dead. And these villain characters are absolutely menacing as villains, as I like the characters as they're the perfect amount of energy for a movie like this. Hans talks with Takagi, as Takagi is the boss of the Nakatomi Building and has $600 million in a vault, and he asks for a code until he says no, and Hans shoots him dead, and John watches the whole thing, and this is when the movie starts to get intense for a somewhat Christmas movie. And I said it. It's somewhat a Christmas movie, as it's a movie set place in Christmas time, if that makes sense. John makes noises and hides from the bad guys and is successful about it, while the bad guys decide to break into the vault, and Hans looks at it as John pulls off the fire alarm to alarm the cops as they come to the Nakatomi Building and turn around thanks to the bad guys, while one of the bad guys come into where John is at. John kills a bad guy off, and takes his machine gun. And this is a smart action movie with a brain in its head. And John gives the message to Hans by saying, I now have a machine gun. Ho ho ho. Get it? Which did make me laugh, and this is well made for an action movie set at Christmas time. One of the bad guys, Carl, learns his brother is dead, whom happens to be killed by John himself, while Ellis believes John will fuck this whole thing up. Well, John gets on the roof and calls the police over to the Nakatomi Building, and they think he's screwing around as the bad guys get to the roof and shoot his ass as they call a black and white over to the Nakatomi Building. And who is those black and white? Sergeant Al Powell, who was getting junk food for his pregnant wife, and as the guys continuously and the bad guys continuously shooting at John as he goes to other floors to hide in. And when he gets to a different floor, he says some clever dialogue, as the dialogue written for this movie is clever at times. Carl finds John on the different floor to his lighter and search for him while shooting at him, but they luckily didn't get him. As John escapes, Al happens to arrive at the Nakatomi and checks up on the disturbances, and John happens to throw the dead body at the car and says, "Welcome to the party, pal," while Argyle is sitting in the parking garage, which was hysterical while all the craziness is going on. And this is one of Bruce Willis's best movies, in my opinion. While it's not an Oscar winner by any means necessary, but it's still a great movie, and that's very entertaining from start to finish. John contacts Hans and chats with him as Hans believes he's a cowboy watching too many John Wayne movies. And at the end of it, John says the classic line from this movie, "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker," and continues to hide around the Nakatomi while we move on to a news reporter named Sam getting a story, or else he'll steal a truck, which isn't necessary as Hans realizes John has the C4 detonators. And John tells Al everything about the German terrorists, and eventually, John tells Al to call him Roy until the cops from the LAPD, led by Dwayne T. Robinson, arrive at the scene, and so are the TV reporters. Meanwhile, Holly negotiates with Hans about moving a pregnant woman to a sofa, which is reasonable, as she introduces herself as Miss Gennaro, which is a heartbreak for John. And Argyle hears on the news something going on in the Nakatomi building, and Dwayne sends some cops in the inside and messes everything up. And what could be in the editing room for is the scenes with the TV reporters, as it kind of drags the movie. The cops try to go get in the Nakatomi and to stop the bad guys, but get a toast as they try to get in, and a shooter shoots at the lights, and John blows up a few of the bad guys with the C4 detonator, while Argyle looks for a way to contact John and drives around the parking garage as John contacts Al and Dwayne, trying to chew John out. But John has the upper hand, and the action scene is spectacular, as it is the most of the action scenes throughout the movie. Ellis tries to make a deal with Hans to tell him who John is and pretends to be friends with John, and trying to get him out to Hans. And while John chats with Al, Hans interrupts and tells the police as well as the news people who John is, and they ask with Ellis where the detonators are at until Hans shoots Ellis dead. And I was kind of glad, as this guy felt like a jerk off. And Dwayne tries to tell Al to tell him as Hans contacts Dwayne and asks for a helicopter full of hostages in the next 2 hours. And Carl looks up for John, whom seems suspicious of what Hans is asking for. And that's the right way to do an action movie, as this movie pulls it off right. Dwayne is encountered by a couple of FBI agents, both named Johnson, take over the crime scene from Dwayne, while Hans goes upstairs and finds John there as he pulls off an accent and pretends to be a part of the party. And Hans realizes the guy keeping him alive is John and pulls the gun on John and almost kills him with a handgun, but he has no bullets in the gun as Carl comes in and tries to shoot him and try to harm him with some glass, thanks to Hans telling Carl that piece of information. But John gets back up while the TV people have John's family's home address in LA, while Carl is driven crazy because of John himself, as this plot is simple, which works. Al contacts John while he's injured, and Al brings up how he accidentally shot a 13-year-old with a toy gun. And I really like the backstory of Al, as it felt earned, and he also brings up how the FBI is taking over the crime scene as they turn off the electricity in downtown, and suddenly the vault opens up. The score being terrific, and the bad guys take everything from the vault, and the Johnsons talks with Hans and negotiates with Hans while John wants to tell Al a message for Holly, how he's been a jerk and how sorry he is, as well as he loves her, before he dies. But Al tells him to tell her himself, as the news gets to the McLean residence and talk to their kids about their parents on the TV. And I'm thinking, oh shit, he's going to get beat up at the end of this. While John realizes they're double crossing the fuzz and have a fight to end with John winning the fight by hanging Carl, which was an awesome scene. The kids expose Holly to the bad guys, even Hans, because of the news reports, and Holly gets captured by Hans and is held hostage, and the hostages get upstairs, and John gets upstairs and looks for Holly with a machine gun and shoots at the air to get people inside. And the Johnsons see that John and believe he's one of the terrorists, as he jumps it while tied up on to get to the 30th floor, while the roof blows up in a classic shot, which is a great shot, by the way, from a far distance. And when John gets to the 30th floor, he almost slips to his death, and he looks for Holly and tapes a handgun behind his back, and Argyle stops a bad guy named Theo from escaping and knocks him out. And John finds Holly with Hans pointing a machine gun at Hans and his bad guy, as he almost gives up until he pulls out the handgun and shoots the bad guy, and he gets Hans, and he almost takes Holly with him until John slips the watch off of Hans as he falls to death, and Holly goes back to being a McLean as she's introduced to Al, and John is as is John, and then she sucker punches the news reporter for putting their kids on the TV as John talks with Dwayne until Carl points a gun at John and Al kills the bastard and redeems himself as a cop, and John and Holly go to in the limousine with Argyle. And the climax was very good, as I could watch this again, but how often? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 8.7 out of 10. The shots in the Nakatomi building are magnificent, and I like John as the protagonist of this movie, and there were times I felt pretty bad for him as a character, and the other characters are a perfect amount of energy for a movie like this. Even the villains in this movie is intense, and for a somewhat Christmas movie, as I'm going to say it, it's somewhat a Christmas movie, because it's a movie set in Christmas time. This is a smart action movie with a brain in its head, and this is a well-made action movie set at Christmas, in which sometimes it made me laugh with the dialogue written for the movie is cleverly written at times, with this being one of Bruce Willis's best movies in my opinion. While it's not an Oscar winner by any means necessary, but it's still a great movie that's very entertaining. But what could be in the editing room floor is the scenes with the TV reporters, as that kind of dragged the movie a bit. Otherwise, this is a great movie. The action scenes are spectacular, as are most of the action sequences throughout the movie. And this is a solid recommendation for the movie as an action movie that is somewhat a Christmas movie because it takes place during the holiday season, as the action works for an action movie, and it pulls off the genre right. And the plot is absolutely simple with a very good climax, and I would watch this anytime, whether it's Christmas time or summertime or autumn time or any time in the world. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with Die Hard 2, Die Harder. And until then, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker!